Government has taken measures to tighten perceived loopholes in the country's gender-based violence legislation following public outcries over various incidents of gender-based violence. Just this weekend, actress Thandeka Mdeliswa died in what her families described as a gender-based violence incident. To discuss some of the practical ways in which gender-based violence can be combated, we're joined by Feminist Lebo Ramafoko. Thank you so much for your time tonight and just for being available to have this conversation. The various pieces of legislation that are in front of Parliament now that are meant not just to close the gap, I suppose, when it comes to our legislation, but also are meant to create a system that is more victim-centered. What are your impressions on those pieces of legislation, and do you think that they will be successful in doing exactly what they've been set out or designed to do?
Hi, Cathy. You know, I think for me, legislation is not going to do it alone. We need to ask ourselves, are we even implementing the legislation that we currently have? Women, even when they report, which is the tip of the iceberg, only a small percentage of women report, are talking about the secondary victimization that they receive from those that are meant to implement the laws that we currently have. We are not questioning patriarchy and challenging the social norms that make men to believe that when they have bought you a drink, they deserve to sleep with you. When they ask you out in a relationship, and when you say no, then you can die because they cannot take refusal. We are not incorporating it enough in the way that we educate our boy children. But more importantly, 60% of children are growing up in single-headed households, meaning that older men have abdicated responsibility of bringing up children. We are also not seeing enough older men questioning how patriarchy has affected them and actually working to dismantle patriarchy. Because the social norms in South Africa are such that when a woman says no to a man, they are gambling with their lives. We've seen social media posts of a woman showing a man following them up to their complex because they would not give them their number wherever that they are. And sadly enough, these are perpetuated across class and, across many social strata. Women are talking about reporting to the police and being treated very shortly by the police. And we also know that there is poor policing and poor investigation. And we are having a number of institutions as well that will, support patriarchy. And until we make sure that this becomes everybody else's business, the laws, no matter how much legislation can go forward, and for as long as even our churches are basically propping up patriarchy, our workplaces are propping up patriarchy, we are not going to see violence subside in our country.
Let's talk then in particular about just the way in which you believe these conversations need to be had, because it's a change of psyche. What do you think has been the impact of the ongoing protest, the ongoing way in which feminists like yourself have ensured that this conversation stays part of the national agenda?
So I think the conversations have certainly gone a long way in at least conscientizing people about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. What has not happened is the silencing of the counter-narrative. So if you really look at some of the conversations and the pushback that women like myself, I once reflected that if you really want to see patriarchs come out of the closet, is if even on social media you put next to your name or in your handle feminist, people will not react to you and engage on the issue that you are talking about, but will come at you. Because in fact, even in the way that men are socialized to engage with issues is in a violent manner. And I think one of the things that we are seeing is that, people define violence in very narrow terms. But what is also lacking is self-reflection. And you see it in society. So we can talk about violence against women until one of our favorite males is being accused of violence. Then you will see other men, coming on and saying, where's the proof? Why did this woman not report earlier? What about this? What about that? So in a lot of ways, what we are not seeing is the fact that even in spaces, men are not able to self-reflect and own the fact that regardless of the social strata that you come from, the fact that you are born male, you are born with certain privileges of that gender. I've been shocked, Cathy, listening to 9-year-olds speak about pregnancy, 10-year-olds who say, if a girl gets pregnant, it's not my issue. I'm not the one that's going to bring up children. And then you ask yourself, who is socializing these young boys? And often women, particularly because they are mainly bringing up children, are the ones that are blamed. But men never reflect and say, what is the impact of our absence in the lives of these children? But more importantly, even many programs that are about men. I mean, interestingly, I have seen even during August, men have men-only panels about how do we protect our women, where even the language of women are ours to protect. Men have not really gotten into self-reflection. What I think it will take is a lot of work in dismantling our norms and beliefs. But our norms and beliefs will only be dismantled if we see action being taken. Institutions are still, like the university called Rhodes, are still excluding a young woman who spoke out against rapists on campus and excluding them for life. And therefore, we are saying on one level, there is legislation that is saying we are protecting women, and we want to make sure that those who violate women are put in jail. But you are saying institutionally, how even men are using cases of defamation to silence women who want to speak out. And I also think that we need to be questioning, therefore, whether or not our practice in society meets what our legislation says. You still find people who will say, well, culturally, you can talk about these things in one way, but you cannot talk about them in where it relates either to my religion and my culture. And again, Cathy, it speaks to the fact that we do not want to self-reflect. But more importantly, Cathy, we must also draw the links that needs to be drawn. So when we are looking at, for an example, corruption in our country, and you find that we do not have proper policing and proper investigative capacity to investigate the cases that are there, and the courts are telling you that they are full and they do not have capacity, you ask yourself, what would happen if all the monies that have been stolen were really put into putting capacity where you need it? So on one level, we could talk about legislation. But if these cases are going to get into ill-equipped investigators, a criminal justice system that continues to fail women, not only because of the way they don't understand, but because of the capacity that they are having. So in a lot of ways, each time we listen to a story or a case of corruption, we also realize that even if the laws were adequate or even more than adequate, if we do not have the resources to implement them. If, for an example, people are talking about, investigations taking long and the courts, there are cases not seeing a day in court. If you are also talking about during even lockdown, children and women being locked down with their abusers and not having enough shelters, or the existing shelters not even having capacity to deal with the issues. You don't have social workers out in all schools, especially in rural areas. How are you going to make sure that the legislation that you have in front of you is going to serve a woman in a very rural or even urban or informal settlement? So also, where we dedicate our resources, and how resources then get spent in a whole lot of ways needs to say for ourselves, are we really serious about fighting gender-based violence?